In 1925, the Scotsman John Logie Baird achieved the very first successful television transmission. In 2016, a posthumous Emmy was awarded to not John Logie Baird, but another Scottish inventor named Alexander Bain, who died almost 50 years before Baird's first successful transmission. This raises a big question. Why was an award for television excellence given to a man who died long before television even existed? And what does that have to do with the process that took us from only being able to transmit audio to being able to transmit images also? Well, that's what we're about to find out. Like so many of these processes, the development of all the steps that led to television was scattered all over the world, with often parallel, similar inventions happening separately. So for the sake of clarity and length, we're going to try and focus down to a few key figures, starting with our Emmy Award-winning Scottish friend Alexander Bain. In 1843, Bain was 33 years old and had already achieved, or was in the process of achieving, significant inventions in the development of electric clocks, synchronizing them using telegraph wires, and he had made major advancements in the speed of telegraph message sending through the use of his chemical telegraph. But when it comes to television, his key breakthrough was his experimental fax machine. So what does a fax machine have to do with television? Well, up to this point in history, we were still in the very infancy of even figuring out how to send electric signals, and we were still 23 years away from the breakthrough of how to send audio. But somehow, Bain was already a whole step ahead, thinking about how to send images electronically, which was the primary idea that led us to television. He was already tackling the key problem of how to convert an image into an electric signal that can be sent over distance. His solution built on his experience with electric clocks, and it involved using two synchronized pendulums, much like used on a clock. On each pendulum was a stylus, and the transmitting pendulum would swing back and forward in front of a flat sheet that would either contain an image or text in the form of metal shapes raised above a flat insulating material surface. As the pendulum would swing back and forward, the stylus would briefly receive a flow of current as it passed the raised metallic tops of the image or text, and would receive no current in the parts with only insulating material. This transmitting pendulum would be slowly raised as it swung, therefore scanning the whole image. The receiver would contain a matching pendulum, and its swing synchronized with the first. This one would slowly rise also as it swung back and forward, with the stylus outputting a burst of current at the same positions as the transmitting stylus received them. This current would hit a special chemically treated paper that would reproduce the image line by line. If you consider the various complications associated with this idea, especially in regards to keeping the two pendulums in sync, you'll know that this was neither a very effective or very accurate solution. But it did work, and it was absolutely critical in terms of its importance. It was the first solution discovered so far that was a potential answer to the question of how do we electronically send images, and you'll see some of its key concepts still present when we get to the television. And it was this breakthrough that was recognised 173 years later with an Emmy Award, when it was understood just how critical this rudimentary fax machine was in the process that led to television. The next important step was, in the tradition of so many great discoveries, a complete accident. In 1872, an English electrical engineer named Willoughby Smith was investigating materials to be used in the transatlantic telegraph cable. He had some wires made from the rare element selenium, and he noticed that they were varying in their electric conductivity. Upon further investigation, he noticed that this was due to sunlight. Their conductivity increased with sunlight upon them and decreased without. Why does this matter? All of our perception of images is based off of light and its varying frequencies and strengths. Without light, we can't see anything, and with everything we do see, what we're actually seeing is the reflected light. So if we were ever going to transmit an image electronically, finding a way to convert varying amounts of light into a varying electric signal would be key. And Willoughby Smith had just accidentally found our first answer to that problem. And here is where we throw back to our last couple episodes with James Clerk Maxwell and Heinrich Hertz, whose work we discussed in relation to the invention of the radio. Because the same discovery that made radio possible is also what made television possible. And that discovery is the electromagnetic wave, which Maxwell predicted and Hertz proved. But there was something else they both discovered that we didn't discuss in relation to the radio, and it's that light is also an electromagnetic wave. In those episodes, we explained that a change in electric field will generate an electromagnetic wave, and we know this wave can transport energy through space, that can then transfer to the electrons in a receiver, causing current to flow. And it turns out that light carries the potential to do exactly the same thing, because it is an electromagnetic wave also. And when all images are composed of light, you can start to see how these pieces would eventually come together in the minds of those exploring this idea. But we must remember that everything we've discussed so far in relation to the television actually predates Maxwell's major publishing of his work, and Hertz's subsequent proving of Maxwell's predictions. So even though Smith was witnessing proof that light was an electromagnetic wave, he had no idea that was what he was witnessing. The next big step from here is where we pick up on a concept that Bain first introduced with his early fax machine, and that's the idea of scanning an image line by line to transmit it. In 1884, a German engineer named Paul Nipkow registered a patent for the Electris telescope, a device that became simply known as the scanning disc. This involved a rotating disc that had an inward spiraling sequence of holes, so that when the disc is spun, it only lets light through each of the holes in sequence, thus creating a continuous line-by-line scan of the subject being recorded. Strangely, Nipkow didn't seem to do anything with this freshly patented idea, and it lapsed within 15 years due to lack of interest. Little did he know at the time that one day he would be hailed as one of the fathers of television because of his scanning disc. It took another Scotsman to pick up the process that had started with Bain's fax machine, and this was John Logie Baird many years later in 1923, in a world where the wireless transmission of audio was now commonplace. And it's here, back in Scotland, the home of Bain's Emmy Award-winning fax machine, that we will return to next episode to continue the process. We will discuss how Baird and others began to make the breakthroughs that brought us the device that has dominated so much of mankind's lives since, the television.